Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Dr. Mary Payton with All About STEM Radio. As you know, I come to you every Wednesday here on the Blue Stream from 6 to 7 p.m. And I am so happy to be here once again. And for me, being a proud service member slash retiree, I want to remind y'all to give positive thoughts to everybody who was touched by 9/11. And, bottom line is that's all of us. That is all of us. And if you were able to make it to any ceremonies today, I'd like to thank you, thank you, thank you so much for the support. Also, don't forget, for those of us here in Arlington, the Arlington Museum of Art, this is the last few days of the Keith Haring exhibit. It ends on the 15th. So if you can make it, it is a wonderful, wonderful exhibit. And Metro Sports Fieldhouse is having their sports and career literacy program date on Saturday from 10 to 12:30 at the Maverick Activity Center at UTA. And last but not least, the library, downtown library here in Arlington, is having their STEM day, their STEM Family Day. So I forget what time it is, but it shouldn't be hard to look up. Just go on to Arlington Libraries and you can find out what time it is, because I'm going to that. I know it's after 12 because I'm planning to make it to both. But ladies and gentlemen, I again have a outstanding guest for you today, and she's calling in from Fredericksburg, or around Fredericksburg. Her name is Miss Nyta Brown. She is the superintendent of the Old Tunnel State Park here in Texas. And if you don't know of that park, you should know of that park because it has a large bat population down there. I went to a bat release this summer when I went down to Fredericksburg, and her staff told me I had to have her on the show. So, good afternoon, Miss Brown. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great, thank you.
So, you've already said the weather is nice down in Fredericksburg. You got a little rain. So, if you don't
Yes.
mind, would you tell my audience a little bit about you?
Myself, I actually live in Comfort,
Okay.
Texas, which is a little small town, about 20 miles or so from Fredericksburg.
Okay.
I grew up here. I
Oh,
moved away for a little bit when I was married to someone in the Navy and lived in Norfolk, Virginia for a while, but I came back to Texas pretty fast because I missed it a lot. My background as far as what I've studied at school, and
mm-hmm.
I was going to be a high school English teacher, and my BA is in English. Um, but I did not enjoy being in the classroom very much when I did my student teaching. So I had already applied to grad school for environmental science
Uh-huh.
and got involved with Parks and Wildlife as an intern and started studying bats and just became inspired by how important they are to the environment and
Mm-hmm.
how cool they are. And so I got my degree, environmental science with an emphasis in environmental education.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of my background in what I went to school for.
Okay. Now, you said you started doing some things with park and recreations that got you interested. What did you do back then that got you interested? Were you a volunteer or were you doing research? What was that?
I actually volunteered at Old Tunnel State Park quite a while ago,
Okay.
uh, and it became a park in 1991, and I think I volunteered there like in 1999, 2000, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And bats are just fascinating. I've always been fascinated by bats, though, since I was a little kid. My aunt had an old ranch house with bats that lived in her chimney.
Wow.
And as a kid, I used to go outside every night to watch those bats come out of the chimney. I just thought it was really cool. And of course, I was a kid and I thought vampires were cool too. And so,
There's
I
nothing
used
wrong
to
with
pick
that.
my scabs and wait for a vampire bat to come and get me. But, now I know we don't have vampire bats in Texas. But as a kid, it was always fascinating. So when I started interning with Parks and Wildlife, I uh, started studying bats and working with different professors and getting to do different research
Oh, okay.
on bats and their importance to Texas, especially to agriculture here in Texas. And that's kind of what sparked my desire to learn more about them.
Okay, okay. Now, here in Texas, what is the primarily the major type of bat that we have here?
The most common bat species is the Mexican free-tailed bat. And those are the ones that you hear about, as you did, getting to go and watch like millions of bats come out from whatever they're roosting in. It's estimated during the summer months here in central Texas, we have about 100 million Mexican free-tailed bats that migrate up from Mexico to roost in different places around central Texas. So it's our most common bat species.
Hmm. Do we have others other than the Mexican freetail?
Oh, yes. We are in the battiest state of the United States of America. I like to brag about that.
Are you
Being a
talking about
Texan, I
us
like
as
to
people
brag.
or no? I'm teasing. But so what else?
No, we
Uh-huh.
do have the greatest diversity of species out of any state. The United States has
Wow.
47, and here in Texas we have 32.
32 out of the
So we have quite
47?
a, correct, out of 47, yeah.
Wow. So how did we get
And
so
here in,
lucky?
how did we get so many? Is
No,
that
so
what your question?
lucky. But anyway,
Oh, so lucky. It's because we have so many great ecological regions
yeah.
in Texas that attracts all these different species. The greatest diversity is out in the Big Bend area of Texas. West Texas has mountains and deserts, all different kinds of ecologies out
Yeah.
there that attract varying species that feed on different things. So,
Now, yeah, and I noticed that when I was in Big Bend last year, August, had never gone there, and I decided. I said, I told my youngest son, I said, let's go to Big Bend, and he looked at me like I had lost my mind. And we jump in the car and drive out to Big Bend. We stayed there for 4 days. That is like the coolest place to be. But I'm
yeah,
sitting at the Twilight Theater. Have you ever been to the Twilight Theater there? It's that big
yes,
porch that you
uh,
sit on. And
yeah, it's my favorite part of Texas.
I know. And I'm sitting on that
Yeah,
porch and people are just coming by and talking and all of a sudden these things start flying out and I'm like, "Oh my goodness." And they were bats. I knew what they were. But they come so close to you. It just kind of took me off guard initially. But yeah. Uh, oops. I'm turning my
do you know why bats fly close to you, by the way?
No, I don't.
People assume, I always hear people saying that I was outside and these bats were trying to attack me, they were diving at me. We are insect attractants. So oftentimes little insects like gnats and midges and mosquitoes even are probably
Uh-huh.
flying close to us. And we may not even be aware of it, but bats are. So they're probably just feeding around you rather than, bats aren't purposely going to get near you.
Mhm.
They use echolocation to help them find their way, and they can detect something as fine as a human hair from 30 feet away.
Mhm.
So they know we're there. And so it's more of just a feeding issue that they're probably helping you by eating some of those things that might be bugging you.
And I noticed that they didn't even bother me, but they just kept they flew kind of close. I mean, to us when we were sitting out there talking, but they never like landed on anybody or got close to anybody. I mean, close enough to touch. But I was
Exactly.
like, okay, so then I learned something. But I knew while I was there I didn't get bit by any mosquitoes. I was like, wow, this is cool. You can be outside and not have to worry about anything. But
True.
now down at the old tunnels, are the Mexican free-tailed bats the only ones that are there, or do you have any other species?
Yeah, at Old Tunnel we have another species called the cave myotis bat. There's only about 3,000 of them. In comparison, at our peak of population of free-tailed bats, we have about 3 million of them, which is right now, by the way, August and September.
Really?
The myotis share the tunnel
Uh-huh.
as a roosting space, but they have separate roosting area from the Mexican free-tails.
Okay.
They also come out separately. So the free-tails are the ones people come to see. The myotis come out a little bit later after dark all
Oh.
the time and fly closer to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not really visible when they come out. They're a very beneficial bat, though, because they do eat mosquitoes, and one individual myotis bat can eat 600 mosquitoes in an hour. So you times that times 3,000, it's a whole lot of mosquitoes in one night. So
That
very
makes that area a
beneficial.
nice place to live then.
Yes, yes.
But before I go any further, tell my audience a little bit about the old Tunnel State Park. A
Sure.
little bit of the
So,
history.
sure. Old Tunnel is basically called Old Tunnel because our main feature there is an abandoned railroad tunnel.
Okay.
The tunnel was built back in 1913, and it was part of a railroad. It was a very short rail line that went from Fredericksburg to Comfort. It was only went 23.9 miles, and it was put in through the hill there because those coal-burning engines couldn't pull a full freight car over the top of the hill. So they built the tunnel to get through the hill rather than going over it. And there were several depot stops along the way, and people rode it and hauled their goods on it, so it was put to good use. But it really never made any money, and by 1941, the railroad was bankrupt.
Okay.
So they decommissioned it and pulled up all the tracks and the ties, so there's not a lot of railroad history left except for the tunnel itself. And the raised rail bed that you can see if you walk along our nature trail past our bridge there, you can see the old raised rail bed for a little ways. So in 1942, that's kind of when the last scraps were pulled away from the railroad. And the rancher that owned that property, he did not live there. So we don't know for sure when bats showed up. But in the 50s, another rancher that lived down the road was out one evening, and he saw smoke coming out from the tunnel, and he thought a fire had started.
Oh.
And he went over to investigate, and it wasn't smoke. It was a whole bunch of bats.
Oh, I
So
bet
they
that
really do look
scared
like
him.
smoke when you kind of watch them from a distance. And so they've been there for sure since the early 50s. And it was privately owned until 1991. Again, the rancher had passed down through their family, so the same family owned it. And because they didn't live there, it was fenced off, but people were just climbing the fence and unfortunately were doing things that trying to harm the bats.
Oh,
A
no.
lot of people, still today there are a little bit of misconceptions about bats, not as many as there were back then.
Yeah.
And so that rancher contacted Parks and Wildlife, and Parks and Wildlife purchased the property back in 1991, and it became a wildlife management area,
Okay.
which it was, and the focus was on research and protecting and conserving the bat colony, which is still our focus now. But in 2011, they transferred Old Tunnel to the Parks Division because there were so many visitors coming out to the park. So they made it a park to accommodate visitors rather than as much research efforts.
Okay.
So that's kind of the history of the park itself.
Now, when I came over the summer, we sat up in the bleachers, and because it had rained and was muddy, they didn't let us go down to the lower bleachers. But are people still able to go down to the cave? I mean, not the cave, the tunnel opening itself.
So during the day, every single day, the trail is open from sunrise until 5 o'clock. And that trail takes you down to a bridge that you can turn and look at the tunnel from that bridge. You're about 50 yards away. So you can't get right up to the tunnel, and you can't get in the tunnel. You really wouldn't want to go in there anyway.
I bet
It's
it's
full of a
smelly.
whole bunch of guano. guano is chest level in some places if
Are
you don't
you?
know where to walk. So it's not a real hospitable environment. So we don't let people up to the tunnel, but you
Oh,
can get a
okay.
really good view at it from the trail.
And those of
Yeah.
you who don't know what bat guano is, it's bat waste. That's all I'm going to
Yes.
say. But wow. Um, Now, so in roughly 1991, y'all stopped letting people go up into the tunnel. So prior to that, people were probably going in and doing all kind of things to irritate the bats. I'm glad Park and
Yeah,
Recreations
they
took
were.
over.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, because people didn't understand
Hmm.
bats, and a lot of people thought all bats were vampires or that they all carried rabies, and neither one of those things is true. Obviously, they had tried to burn the colony out by
Oh,
throwing things into the tunnel, and they had tried to. There were people there that shot them with shotguns and things like that. So it was all just, based on lack of education.
yeah.
And things are changing. I very seldom hear the same things that I heard when I first started working here
Hmm.
15 years ago. So it's great to know that some of us have made a difference in terms of how people feel about bats.
Well, I know when I came down, there were a lot of people that came to watch the immersion of the bats that evening, and I was so surprised because it's kind of a little bit of a trek to get there, but
Yes.
it was well worth it. Although it had rained and you didn't see as many come out, but you know your staff there are so knowledgeable when they give the lecture before it's as the sun is going down. I mean, could answer questions. The information was so great until it gave food for thought for a lot of people. And so I was just surprised at the number of people that were actually there. And this was after it had poured down rain earlier that day.
Yeah,
So,
it's a popular attraction around Fredericksburg,
hmm.
especially if you're familiar with Fredericksburg. Now that you've been there, things seem to shut down right at dark, and so
Oh
there's
yeah.
not a lot to do, especially for families. And so it's only 13 miles from Fredericksburg out to the park,
Hmm.
although it is on a very windy country road. But yeah, so it's something to do. But also, it's pretty fascinating to. I mean, I never get tired of seeing the bats emerge. It's just a fascinating experience. We do get a lot of visitors. We actually
Uh-huh.
have to limit visitation on some weekends to
Mm.
try to protect the resource. So, and you mentioned my staff. I am the only staff person, and I
Hmm.
have to give a shout out to all my volunteers. I couldn't do my job without them. I have 35 or so volunteers.
Really? They're
Many of
great.
them spend, yeah. This past that season, they will have put in probably close to 4,000 hours helping out the park. So definitely couldn't do my job without them. And they are great. All of them are bat lovers like me and love what they do out there. So I appreciate them very much.
Mm. I mean, they're very knowledgeable. They seem like they enjoy um, themselves. You probably get to keep them for a long time because they come in and they just, I mean, it was just comfortable with them. So,
Yes,
I have to
yeah.
thank them. Thank y'all for being there because if y'all hadn't have been there, I would not have known to call Miss Nyta to have her on the show because they spoke so highly of you. So,
Well, yeah.
but but question. You spoke of research. What type of research
hmm
has been done there at the tunnel?
There's been quite a few research projects throughout. Different graduate students have
Mhm.
come out to do research. Some of them were done before I started, but
Okay.
the ones that I've been aware of are, we had two students a few years ago. One was studying wintering populations of bats around
Oh.
Texas.
Mhm.
Um, Climate change is a thing, and migration patterns are changing. And this student was trying to figure out what these overwintering bats were eating, since
Mhm.
most of what they eat during the summer may not be active in the winter time, the insects that they feed on.
Mhm.
And then another student, she was also studying their eating habits, and she was collecting guano to study the remnants of what could be found of what they're eating during the winter months. So those are two research projects that I was involved in. I did a research project myself.
And what was that?
With trying to track our bats, their movements, to see where they go to have their pups, because our females don't give birth at the tunnel.
Really?
And so we used radio tracking equipment to try to track their movements, and also used some non-toxic fluorescent dye that we painted on the bats, and then tried to follow them to a cave we thought they went into, because that dye fluoresced in UV light. And that was a method of us trying to figure out where they went. And we used telemetry devices to try to follow some of them as well. Lately, what the projects that are being done, research projects, have to do with white nose, which is a fungus that has been killing off hibernating bats around the United States. And we've been tracking our wintering bats to see if they have any evidence of that fungus, which eventually leads to the disease of white nose syndrome.
Oh.
So that's something, a monitoring research program that's been going on around Texas. So.
Okay, so when you talk about the fungus, have you kind of started realizing where it was coming from? Where are they migrating to where they're becoming contaminated?
Yeah, unfortunately, this started back in 2006 in the Northeast.
Okay.
They went into a cave of hibernating bats in the spring, and 98% of the bats were dead. And what they found was happening is they had this fungus on them that was an irritant, and these bats would wake up from hibernation, and then they use up all their energy stores, and they die of starvation because they couldn't find food in the wintertime. So since 2006, it has now spread into 31 states, is the last number that I know of, and up into Canada. And it's pretty serious. There's ways to kill the fungus, but you can't spray a whole roosting area because you'd kill everything. And so a lot of great conservation organizations are working on ways to try to figure out a solution to this problem. And meanwhile, they have protected some endangered species by giving them artificial roosts that they can control the environment in so that they don't just totally die off. And they think the fungus, it is a naturally occurring fungus, but it's not natural to the United States. Somehow it got here from Europe. They don't know exactly how. Either a person brought it on their clothing, a caver possibly, or another bat could have hitched a ride over on a ship or something and brought the fungus with them. So here in Texas, our caves don't get really cold and stay cold, and the fungus needs a cold cave environment.
Okay.
But the issue is that our bats could get the fungus on them and then take it to other places where it could affect hibernating species. We did find last winter, I caught a bat that had wintered over at Old Tunnel. It was a Mexican freetail, and it did have minute traces of the fungus.
Oh.
But that's not the disease. The disease takes years to start up.
Yeah.
So they don't think freetails will have an issue with it, because if they even got the disease, they don't hibernate.
Oh,
they migrate. But they could spread it to other bats that hibernate. So all of that to say is the promising things that are going on is there are two research projects. One of them is UV light seems to make the fungus stop growing.
Good.
So they're going to test bigger versions of that in cave environments to make sure it doesn't hurt anything, this UV light. And that may be a solution. And the second one is they found a naturally occurring bacteria that they grew next to the fungus in the lab, and the fungus stopped growing as well. So they're going to test like an aerosol version of that bacteria to see if it would stop the fungus also in a cave environment and not hurt other things.
Good. Now,
promising things going on.
Yes, sounds like a lot. Now, excuse me, and you said not kill other things. What other things are, let's say, in the tunnels with the bats? Because
lots of insects.
Okay.
Spiders and beetles and even because we have water and seeps and springs
Oh,
that come through the tunnel walls. So inside the tunnel is really wet environment as well on one side of it. The other end is more dry where the bats hang out. And there are, invertebrates and things in the water as well, frogs.
mm-hmm.
Not too many other. I have seen a raccoon in there before hanging out, but nothing else. And some birds that nest along the outside edges of the tunnel.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that our bats migrate. Um,
Correct.
what is like the migration cycle? Because you said this time here, August, September, is when you see the largest number of bats
Mm-hmm.
at Old Tunnel. What
Correct.
is their migration pattern for that area?
So usually Mexican free-tails migrate here from Mexico in the
Mm-hmm.
late spring, early summer.
Okay.
And a gradual process where usually about the middle of May we have the numbers that we'll have for the first part of the summer. The reason Old Tunnel has an increase in August and September is because the juveniles are flying
Okay.
and the mothers that have left to go give birth, they come back to the tunnel, and males have also moved in by then, when in the first part of the summer we only have females.
Okay. Okay.
And the juveniles come back as well, so our population pretty much doubles from what we had at the beginning of the summer. And then what happens as we start to have some cold fronts coming through and the temperature starts dropping,
Mm-hmm.
which in Texas can sometimes seems like it's taking a while for that to happen lately. But usually by about the end of October through the first part of November, the bats will start leaving back to Mexico for the winter. And we'll go down there where they can still find the food they need to survive through the winter.
Oh, okay. Okay. I did not know that. That is like, I knew that they migrated, but I didn't know
Yeah,
exactly when. Um,
yeah.
now in in Old Tunnel, I know that's like the largest bat population here in Texas, but Austin also. For those of you who have never gone to Austin, well, I mean most people have gone to Austin. If you go down to Austin, you can also see the bats come out of the is it the Continental Bridge?
It's the Congress Street Bridge.
The
Yeah,
Congress Street Bridge. And I've
yeah,
been to that immersion a few times. And I love the fact that they built that bridge so that the bats can be housed in there or can be in there during the daytime. Is that something that is kind of normal around different parts of Texas that they will build structures or bridges or things like that to support the habitat for the bats?
yes. Once TxDOT found out how important bats are to the environment
Uh
and
huh.
agriculture, many of their highway bridges are built with these expansion joints. Uh, Not only because that's the way they build their bridge, but
Yep.
because they know that bats will roost inside of them.
Yeah.
And Congress Street
Mhm.
Bridge has about 1.5 million
Yeah.
free tails that roost there. You mentioned that we are the largest, and I would love to be able to brag about that, but we are actually one of the smallest. The largest cave of bats is found outside of San Antonio. It's called
Oh yeah.
Bracken Cave.
That's right. That's
They
right.
have 20 million Mexican free tails, so we can't compare to their 20 million with our measly 3 million.
Hey, it's still a lot. It they're
It is a lot. It's pretty fantastic no matter how many bats you see, if you ask, in my opinion.
yeah.
So,
But I mean, just to be there and be around them, I mean, it's just amazing because like I've said, I've seen them there. I've seen them in Austin, and I've seen them down at Big Bend or over at Big Bend. From you, for me, it's down to Big Bend, and it's just amazing. Um, now, oops, I gotta look at my notes. We talked about that. Okay, bat conservation here in Texas. You just mentioned TxDOT. How did TxDOT
hmm
really get involved in bat conservation? Or do we have a lot of organizations that are involved in bat conservation here in Texas?
well, I think TxDOT's involvement came after when those bats first started inhabiting under the bridge in Austin,
Yes.
a lot of people in Austin didn't want the bats there, and there was a whole kind of outcry for them to get rid of the bats.
Oh.
And so Merlin Tuttle is a famous bat biologist. Started Bats Conservation International, which is an organization that is originated in Austin.
Mm-hmm.
And their main purpose at first was to educate people on the importance of bats to the environment. And they kind of saved the bats there at Congress Street Bridge. And so, again, TxDOT kind of expanded that out when they build highway bridges, just because they knew how many insects bats eat.
Okay.
And many of those insects are agricultural pests. So Bats Conservation International is a nonprofit organization based here in Texas, in Austin. Okay. And they do great work for bats all around the world. A really great organization. If you want to go read about them or find out about Bracken Cave, batcon.org is their website. They have a lot of great information on their webpage. And there's a lot of other organizations that do different types of bat conservation. There's a couple of rehab centers who do great things in rehabbing injured and sick bats and taking care of them. Mineral Wells Bat World Sanctuary is one place here in Texas. And Parks and Wildlife has a dedicated person, a mammologist, and he does a lot of work with working on research for white nose, making sure that it's not spreading, and the conservation efforts towards that end here in Texas as well.
That's interesting. But, it's a lot of things that are being done because we've got to protect our resource. I consider a bat a resource because it does help the environment a lot. But when we look at these bats, how big is a Mexican white-tailed bat? What is the size?
So they're Mexican freetails, and most of our bats here in Texas are considered to be medium-sized. They weigh about half an ounce.
Oh.
Just to give you an idea what that feels like, if you put 2 nickels in your hand, that's about half an ounce. So they're pretty small for their size. They're heavy for their size, though, because their bones are solid, not hollow like most birds' bones are.
Okay.
So that's one of the reasons why bats hang in an elevated position, is so they can drop down to get air under them to help them get up, because they have a hard time just flapping their wings and taking off from the ground because of their solid bones. But their wingspans are different for medium-sized bats. Freetails have about an 8 to 10-inch wingspan.
Okay.
But like the Myotis bat that I told you shares the tunnel as a roosting space, their wingspan is shorter and broader, so more like, 5 to 6 inches long. They're more broad than long. But we do have the largest bat that's found in the United States is found here in Texas. It's called the Western Mastiff bat, and it has about a 20-inch wingspan.
And where are those found?
Quite a bit bigger. They're mainly found out in West Texas. They roost in cliff crevices and rock faces out there and in the mountains of Big Bend.
What was the name of that bat again?
It's called the Western Mastiff bat.
Okay. I'm writing that down.
And in comparison to that, the smallest bat we have here in Texas is called the American Parastraw. And their wingspan is really small. I would say maybe 3 inches, 3 to 4 inches. Okay. So quite a bit size difference.
And those are primarily located where?
Those are also mainly out in West Texas. 21 species hang out in West Texas. Here in Central Texas, we have 8 that are fairly common.
I wonder what makes West Texas so appealing to them. Is it all the open land or what?
I think it's just because there's just so many different ecological areas out there.
You're right.
That attract the different kinds of bats. So mountains and desert, and, even the river area is out there as well.
You're right. There is a lot of diversity out that way. So I'm having one of my moments here. So,
I think that one thing that I want to make sure that
Yes.
people understand is we've talked about bats eating mosquitoes, and that's great because that's kind of a personal thing that most people can kind of feel like they're getting assistance from a bat personally. But here in Texas, most of our bats are insectivores. And Mexican freetails eat a moth that lays eggs on corn and cotton crops.
Okay.
And one moth will lay 1,000 eggs. And one Mexican freetail bat will eat about 40 moths a night. So you have to think about the impact to agriculture because those eggs hatch out into these caterpillars that love to eat the corn. They'll eat the cotton boll and the cotton flower. They're also found in apple orchards. So they're saving farmers a whole lot of money because they're eating these insects and the farmers don't have to use as much pesticide. So it gives us an economic value to that, too, that kind of, I think, helps people appreciate them even better. Just to give you an example, there's a bat cave over by Concan, which is near Uvalde area. It's called Frio Bat Cave. And they have about 12 to 15 million Mexican freetails. They also grow a lot of corn out in that area. And a study that was done out there showed that bats are saving farmers about $1.7 million they don't have to spend on pesticides. So, you know, when people think about money they spend, they can think maybe they're spending a little bit less on some of the things we eat because bats are out there helping farmers. So.
And, you know, it cuts back on the use of pesticides also. But keeping that in mind, what is the range of the bats when they go out? I mean, how far out will they go to feed at night?
Mexican freetails range about 30 to 40 miles a night. They can, in drought conditions, we have tracked them over 100 miles one way. So they could make a 200-mile round trip in a night if they had to. It's not really great for the bat because bats are constantly beating their wings when they fly. And so a Mexican freetail bat, for instance, beats their wings 12 beats a second. So when they have to fly really long distances, the further they fly, the more energy they use, the more food they have to eat. So it's kind of a defeated purpose when they are struggling to find food and having to travel a long distance.
Now, why is it so important for them to beat their wings so frequently as they fly? I mean,
beating their wings, you mean?
Why is...
They don't really have the ability to glide like birds do.
That's what I was going to say. Oh, okay, so they can't glide. That makes sense. That makes sense. Now, speaking of birds, what are the what preys up on the bats? The predator-prey relationship.
Probably one of the things people see the most who come out to watch bat emergences are red-tailed hawks are really common. Other hawk species as well will show up, and falcons. After dark, owls, great horned owls, another common predator. There's also mammals that wait outside of cave entrances. Bats will sometimes end up on the ground because there's just so many of them. They bump into a tree or something. Raccoons and possums and skunks. And then there are even snakes. Coachwhip snakes are one of the most common species that'll show up to feed on bats. So quite a variety of outside predators, but the most predator that there's the most of lives in caves, and we have them in the tunnel, and it's a beetle called a dermestid beetle. And it's a very important beetle to our ecology because it's a decomposer. They mainly feed off of bacteria in the bat guano. So by eating that bacteria, they're helping with decomposition, which is important when you think about how much guano accumulates, right? But these beetles, they're also flesh-eating beetles. So if a bat falls to the ground and it doesn't crawl away or fly away quick enough, so many beetles are inside there that they get on top of the bat, and then it can't move anymore. And they will devour it fairly quickly. Within an hour or so, a medium-sized bat will be totally skeletonized. And they clean off everything, so all of the meaty part is going to be gone. The only thing that's left is the fur and the bones. It looks like it has been washed clean by the time that they're done.
Wow.
And it's a horrible thing. I don't like to think about it because, as we've already discovered, I'm a bat lover. But you have to consider that if a bat fell to the ground in the roost and it didn't get up really quickly,
Yes.
something was probably already wrong with it. It was sick or it was hurt and it was going to die in a matter of time.
Yeah.
So that balance of nature, we have to keep the beetles there to help with decomposition. That's what abandoned a roost if the guano piles kept getting higher and higher. So it's all about balancing out nature.
And that's an awesome thing. And you know what? Speaking of that, that's another great reason for not letting people just go into the caves as they
true.
wish. Because I'm gonna tell you, if I ran into beetles like that, it would scare me to death. Beetle get on my leg and start chewing on my skin. I'm sorry, I'm out of there. I'm out. But that does make sense because people can go in and unknowingly affect the habitat in one way or another, or be affected by that habitat. So, thank goodness y'all don't let us go in there anymore. But but would you take this time to tell my audience if you have any type of social media, Facebook, Twitter? What is the location of the tunnels? If someone needed to contact y'all because they want, to bring a large group out, could you please tell my audience that?
Sure. So I think one thing I didn't say was I said the trail is open every day from sunrise till 5 o'clock.
Okay.
The bats are there usually only May through October, so that's when we call our bat season. And May through October, you can come out and watch the bats from a free upper viewing area any night of the week. And then the lower viewing area is only open on Thursday through Sunday nights for a $5 per person fee. And children have to be at least 4 years old to go to that area. And we only sell tickets on those days beginning around 5:30. So you can't buy them in advance or you can't go online and buy them. We're pretty remote. We don't have internet and we don't have telephone. So it's a cash-only basis, and we can't make change. And so all these things are important. And I know I can say all this, but speaking of social media, the best thing to do to find out information about Old Tunnel is we do have a web page that you can access through Texas Parks and Wildlife's webpage, which is tpwd.texas.gov. And then you can click on state parks and type in Old Tunnel, and it'll give you all the information on our webpage. We do have a Twitter account. I am the only staff person, so I'm in charge of everything. And so sometimes I don't have a lot of time to really get into social media, but I do post park closings on there and bat emergence times. And we do have a Facebook page. Just make sure you go to the one that says official, because there's other ones out there too that aren't ours. But another great way to find out information is we do have a 800 number that people can call, and it's 866-978-2287. And you can find out all kinds of information on that information line. And I update it like twice a week with bat time, so you have an idea of what time to come out. And you can pretty much get all that information that I mentioned already on that information line as well.
And for those of y'all who are listening, that 2287 spells bats.
Yes, it does.
How did y'all get that number? Sometimes those numbers are already out there and you don't always get the cutesy
Yes,
numbers.
this is true, yeah. That was before me, so I don't know how they came up with that. That's great.
But now, because this is a state park, people who have the state park cards because they've paid for the memberships or the family memberships, can that be used to go down to the lower level, or would you have to pay?
No, sorry. The Parks Pass,
Yes.
it only covers entrance fees,
Okay.
and we don't charge an entrance fee.
Okay.
The lower viewing area is considered an activity fee.
Okay.
So people could stay at the upper viewing area for free.
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time, that's a really great place to see the bats, unless
That's
they're
why I
coming
saw.
out after dark. Then it's hard to see them. But yeah, the $5 fee is not covered by the parks pass.
Okay. Okay. My audience needs to know that. But
Okay.
ooh, I don't know what Gary did. The blinds just went down by themselves. But maybe he wants the bats to come out. But so y'all are open. Well, so from October to May, there are no bat.
May to October.
No. October to May, are there no bat immersions or what's going on in the park at that time?
Okay, so usually the bats are there through the end of October,
Uh huh. Mm-hmm.
sometimes even till the middle of November, but we stop our official tours at the
Okay.
end of October.
Okay.
So people could still come out in November and maybe see bats.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It just depends on when the temperature starts to get cooler.
Oh, okay.
Then after that, after bat season, there's not a whole lot of animal wildlife viewing going
Mm-hmm.
on except
Mm-hmm.
for birds.
Uh-huh.
People can come out and go hike. We have the nature trail is about half a mile, a little less than half a mile.
Okay.
And we do have a lot of great wintering birds, so you can go birding and hike the nature trail. We don't have any programs during the off season.
Mhm.
We do a lot of maintenance and habitat management during off season,
Okay.
and I do a lot of outreach programs during that time with schools and organizations. So a lot of that is going on during the months of January and February, and then we actually start up again in March. Even though the season isn't official, we start going out there just to monitor for activity. And
Okay. Now, what do you do with your outreach, just in case someone is local and they want to contact you about that?
so I can visit schools. I have programs that are aligned, to the STAR test,
Oh, okay.
and I have different programs for different grade levels.
Uh-huh.
And they're mostly on bats, but I also they have one on mammals and in general, and I have one on insects. And if they're interested in having me come out to a school, usually what I like smaller class sizes.
Yes.
So many times I go to the school and stay all day, and the one grade level rotates through so that I don't have as many kids at once.
Mhm.
And the program can be as long or as short as they need it to be. I should rephrase that. I don't like to be there talk to kids for longer than 40 minutes or so, because I feel like I lose their attention
Yeah,
after
I
a
was
while.
getting
But
ready to say you probably lose their attention.
yeah, I have a PowerPoint with lots of really cool videos, and I also
Wow.
bring a lot of display and some hands-on things that give kids, a chance to kind of get involved themselves too. So
That is so cool.
if they're interested in doing that, they can email me is
Mhm.
the best way to contact me. And my email's kind of long, so there's no reason for me to say it, I don't think, but you can find it on the webpage and the Old Tunnel Facebook page. The contact email's there. So
Okay. And if you like, I can if you want to send me the email that you want the guest to have, I can post that. But
Okay.
with you being by yourself, I know this is a lot, but sounds like you're passionate about this. So, it's
Yeah, I am.
probably a work of love for you. But
Yes, it is.
but I
Yeah.
think I think they're cool. I think they're pretty cool. Just to be around them and see them, and now that I know why they never landed on me, it makes me very happy because I was
Yeah.
like, you're sitting there and you're ducking. I'm like, okay, it's not coming at me, but what, why is it coming near me? Now I know it's feeding because there are insects that come close to us at night. But we've got like 2 more minutes left. Is there
Mhm.
anything that you would like my audience to know about the park? Oh, question that I meant to ask that. I've got it written down. I forgot. Do you allow camping at the park?
Oh, no, our park is day use only.
Okay.
So, um, there's no camping. There are picnic tables. People could
Okay.
picnic at the park, but we don't allow any camping. We don't allow open fires, so we don't have any like barbecue pits and things like that either.
Okay.
So we are the smallest park in Texas, and our main purpose there is, the conservation and protection of the bats.
Okay. Okay.
So we don't have a lot of other kinds of activities that other parks might offer to the public.
Okay. And that makes sense. I just want to make sure my audience knew that there was no camping
Sure.
there.
Correct.
But and no open fires. I didn't know that because I mean, being there, I noticed that you have a lot of tight vegetation, so I can understand that because if you had a forest fire or an open fire, you could affect the habitat of a lot of the wildlife there.
Correct. Yes.
But hey, I want to thank you for coming on the show today, and give a great shout out to your team down there because they are so knowledgeable and they make people feel so comfortable because you have people that are little skittish about even being around bats, but they make everybody so comfortable. And I want to thank them for their volunteerism because I know how important that is because I do volunteer here myself. And I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. And if you ever have anything that you're doing there that you want posted on All About STEM Radio Show's Facebook page, please share it with me and I'll share it with my audience. So I'd like to say good evening to you and thank you for coming on to the show today.
Thank you. It was fun. Thanks for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen. This has been another great show. And next week, I have Andrew Brinker, who is another one of my wonderful turtle people. He works with the Trinity River Survey, and he's going to be on the show. I've got to go out on a turtle survey with him this summer, and I thought that was so much fun. But please join me again next week here with All About STEM Radio Show on Wednesday from 6 to 7. Bye-bye.